It's on.
Yeah, that's on, yeah. That's pretty much what that is.
Put this on.
Do what the woman says.
Amen.
Right, that's recorded.
All right. Hey, Veronica. This is so awesome that you guys are here because tonight we tonight we explode everything. Right. So it's always fitting, very, very telling to see who has the karma to show up for this teaching. Yeah, very, very fitting. So it was so interesting because, you know, there were some people that told me last week, you know, that they wouldn't be able to be here, and some people that would be tuning in online, and it's always preferential that you receive these teachings in person. You know, there's nothing like the direct transmission, and, you know, maybe you already have a sense of why that is. But particularly with when we get into emptiness, which we're going to fool on tonight. I mean, full tilt boogie. It's so precious because in some ways you could say because it's the most difficult thing for us to grasp. Because if we do grasp it, that's what changes everything. And I always think back to when Geshe-la was here and he was giving his Chi Jedrak teaching, which is directly on what would be called the quality and characteristics of how emptiness works. And it's I think the last time he had given it was maybe 5 years ago or something like that. Very, very rarely ever teaches it because it really takes a certain level of mind and karma to be able to hear that teaching and, first of all, understand any of it, and then second of all, like, not be afflicted about it. And so he gave us an unbelievable blessing coming here to give that teaching. And at one point when he was in the middle of it, and, you know, and the room was just the epitome of stillness, one of the wonderful teachers as well, she had her infant baby there, and the little baby made like this little coo sound, and Geshe-la immediately was like, please take the baby in another room. And he was so urgent about it because the point being, he's like, the forces, however you want to label them, as demons or negative forces or negative karma, will ripen so quickly when they start to get right to the root of how things are really working. So even something like that, like the sweetest thing of like and he was just like, remove the child! I mean, it wasn't, you know, certainly was not violent in any way. I mean, it was completely for us. But I'll never forget that moment because I was sitting down there on the floor next to Lama Cliff, and it was one of those moments of like, oh, everything is happening, you know, and I did hear the baby too. And so when he went right to that, I was so very grateful. So this is great. This is great. All right. You know, that's one thing is to check in to see, like, did anyone like meditate on their death in the past week? Like, yeah, how'd it go?
You know, like the regular
Right.
those kind of popped up as far as like crazy like skeleton like, and I was like, okay, that really makes me want to use this day well.
Great.
I don't want to be dealing with those. I don't want to ever have to look at those because it obviously was like, and I haven't really ever gotten that besides going to sleep.
Yeah.
And it's probably because I was just waking up.
Right.
But it did make me kind of view my day differently and like, okay, what would I really be doing if this was my last day?
And did you act differently at all during the day, even like one moment?
Yeah, I tried.
Great.
To keep it.
Fantastic.
It's hard though.
It is, isn't it? It is. Getting over the kind of even kind of gross, gruesome aspects of death. I mean, there are certain meditations, you know, that we have as well that if that's something that a person is fearful of, which is the aging of their body and or the state or condition of their body, there are specific meditations that really focus on that to help you let go of those attachments. But that's really just a beautiful way to use the practice. Is just that, especially when going to bed as well, because when you go off into what you would consider to be the unconscious of the dream state, there's a lot happening there as well, and there's a lot. They say that the karma that actually is ripening in the dream state is actually a pretty low frequency. It doesn't have as much power as it does in your conscious state. But it's also like when you can do some work in there, it also then gives it such tremendous power to then realize it in the conscious state. So that's wonderful you did that. Do you think about death at all? No, that's all right.
Sorry.
It is. Veronica?
I wasn't here last week. I was up in Harmony.
Oh, yeah, so you were in bliss.
Yes, I was.
Right. That's a good thing to focus on. Yeah, we have that too, focusing on how good life is and what's working well. All right, cool. Well, I'll tell you what, let's, in terms of kind of just, especially since Veronica was not here last week, to do a little review, let's do that, let's do it meditatively. So let's get in our posture for meditation. Yeah. So make sure, once again, it's so important that your back, that your spine is straight as you can make it without feeling like you're forcing it, because you want there's this central energy that's running along the front of your spine, and you really want that to be moving nice and smooth and unobstructed. So push down with your butt if you need to, or have that little tug at the top of your head with that piece of string to make you nice and even. First warm up in meditation really is simply to be still. So still your body, and then start to focus on your breath. Try to do the count starting on your exhale, staying focused on your breath, and nothing else. That's all that matters. This actually calms the mind down to prepare for meditation. Be infatuated with your breath, just amazed by it. Invite the most pure person you can think of to come meditate with you. He or she is perfect in every way. They come and sit opposite of you. Very happy that you invited them here. Think about what makes them so special to you. What is it about them that you really do admire? This is bowing down to them. Imagine an extraordinary gift for them and present it. Something you think that they would just love. If you want to meditate well, then you do need to have a clean conscience. So let's wipe the slate clean for the day. Think about something you did, said, or thought that you wish you hadn't in the past 24 hours. Make a promise not to do that again for a specific period of time. Something reasonable. Now think about what you can do to make up for it. Now bring to mind the good things that you've done in the past day. You know, kind word or thinking sweetly of someone else, thinking kindly of them, or an actual act that you did using your body, helping them out with something, even taking out the trash. Feel happy about it. See it as progress. Pray now that you find a teacher to help you learn what you need to in order to be happy. Ask all the teachers around you to stay in your life and pray for their long, healthy, happy lives. See your teacher start to become smaller and smaller, about the size of your thumb. See them rise up in the air and float above your head, facing the same way as you. And then watch them descend down through the crown of your head into this glimmering light tube that runs down straight to your heart. And when they arrive at your heart, you have there a total paradise for them. They are so happy. They're beaming. Start to deepen your breath. Relax and open your eyes. And that's the warm-up. That's the preliminary. So like we were talking about last week, that's before every meditation. That's before every meditation. Hey, Greg. And just to be clear, because I don't know, maybe Jed had asked about this, or just in terms of those other 3 preliminary meditations, so on suffering, on death, on rejoicing, then what you would do is you would do this, and then you could go into one of those, You know, if you, for whatever reason, you know, saying that if you're feeling down and you needed some brightening up, so you would go into a rejoicing, and then you would actually go into what's one of the main meditations, which is what we'll be getting into tonight. But that preliminary is the one that is, it's the one that we talked about as well, that you get really good at it, and you'll start to see that you'll need to then start pulling the reins in to move through it more quickly, because it becomes so sweet. It just becomes so lovely. You're just like, oh wow, I feel great. You know, I've got the teacher in my heart, and everything's good. And then you'll notice that it's been literally like 25 minutes later, and honestly, the thought then of going into like a main meditation can really seem overwhelming in that moment, you know. And I can't speak to why that is so much karmically, but it's very good to kind of keep if you're looking for a rhythm and you're working with your breath, that each of those steps are kind of like 10 to 15 breaths, and move yourself on. And it's very important, because that is the truth of the matter is that you can then kind of get bogged down in it, and not be able to take on what are some of these other amazing practices. So yes, so let's get into the second point. If you have the 7 steps that looks like this. Veronica, you have one of these?
Were they given out the first time? I was here for the first week.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
didn't bring it.
Maybe if I have,
What's that? But I don't have one.
just wonder if I have one you can look at. Ah, yes. Oh, that's what Kelly. All right, just take that. You're welcome. Yeah, because we'll be cracking this open, wide open tonight. So this whole second point is really about, you know, and bringing to mind again, once again, that this is a practice. So the second point of this practice is really about bodhicitta, which is, you know, our formal definition, which is what, Ryan?
It's the desire to achieve total enlightenment for the sake of all beings.
That sounds pretty good. Yes. So another really practical way this can be seen is as compassion. Just straight up in that sense, that you could, the way you practice it in your life and the way you feel about it is, am I acting with compassion today? Do I feel compassion towards others? So the first 5 lines, because I believe we have 10 here. Yes. So the first 5 lines are actually describing what we would refer to as ultimate bodhicitta, or another way would be wisdom love. And it's really, within these first 5 lines is actually the entire understanding for the foundation of how to truly love someone. Not to put too fine a point on it. And I can't really stress this enough, that you really can't love someone truly until you get this. You know, there's the way that many of us have been operating for a long time, and once we start to open this up, as we will tonight, you'll start to see like, oh, okay, I hopefully am starting to get a sense of what that might be like. Now, the second 5 lines, or the last 5 lines of the second part, is really dealing with what we would refer to as deceptive bodhicitta. And another way of thinking of that is exchanging love, or exchange love. And a very practical way of thinking about this is that it's when, or I should say when, it's where you place your mind in the heart of someone else. And so it's really, here we're talking about a practice, whereas the first part is really dealing with your mindset, with your attitude. And it's important to make a differentiation here that when we talk about ultimate bodhicitta, that the use, the use of bodhicitta really is just more or less a naming convention. It's really just a label. Because the truth of ultimate bodhicitta is that it's not a form of compassion. What it is the experience of the direct perception of emptiness. Now, deceptive bodhicitta, on the other hand, or compassion, is when you're thinking in terms of ending someone else's suffering, so you want to help them and you want to achieve enlightenment so that you can do that. And that's where you're ultimately focused on deceptive reality, which is pretty much the reality we're dealing with all the time. So there, that's very important to see that distinction then, is that for ultimate bodhicitta, which is the wisdom love, that what happens when you have that is the experience of the ultimate nature of reality, whereas deceptive bodhicitta is something that we're working and using to get to that, but what we're using and where we're using and working that is within the realm of deceptive reality. So, and you'll see as we move on, particularly in that first line about learn to see all things as a dream, how that really comes into play, to see how that's truly working. Yeah.
So you're saying like we're using it as a tool to achieve ultimate bodhicitta?
Yes.
But in a sense, is ultimate bodhicitta kind of a word tool for us at this point too?
Yeah.
But not the actual
Experience.
Okay.
Yeah, not the experience. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about it, is that as it's been passed down from those who have had it, is that when you're perceiving the ultimate nature of reality, there is no you, there is no I, there's no self-awareness in that moment. The moment that happens is when you've come out of it. Because the ultimate nature of reality is, of course, being able to see how things are working in both ways. So, and as we unpack that, you'll see what that really means. So, I mean, when we're talking about emptiness, it's very helpful, it's been very helpful for me to also be able to use these other labels about it, which is to say that it's also availability, it's also potential, that it's how things are really working. Some, Geshe-la will also, put it quite simply as neutral, that it's neutrality in a way as well. So if any of those, is something that helps you to be, that opens you up, because that's so much of what this is going to be about. This practice and understanding is that through opening up your mind, you'll open up your heart. And you'll see that those are one and the same. But for us conceptually, that's how this goes with this. We'll start to get into this about like, wow, okay, this is how conceptual reality is working. But the whole point of this is that it opens up your heart. And that's the beautiful thing to me about the experience of when something actually clicks in your mind and you get something, is that actually there is this feeling, there is this emotional feeling of opening up. I mean, it's a beautiful thing when you're reading a book. It's a beautiful thing if you're, if you're an artist and you have some discipline you work in and something flows, is that in that moment is that your mind is completely open and you realize your heart is as well, and it is one and the same thing. And it is what we need to understand in order to truly love. Is this potential? Is this availability that is making everything possible? So thus, we must pull out this. I'm starting to see this thing now as like an Excalibur. Like it's like your own, you get this, you can literally cut out the root of all your ignorance by wielding this thing properly. So, and it's very important. I mean, this was very important for me to hear after, being a couple years into the teachings, was that, those who have perceived this pin directly have said, you need about something like, I think the going rate is like 1,000 hours of the pin teaching before you do see it directly. So for everybody who's seen this little object before, log your hours. This is really good. Log some time.
I thought it was 10,000.
Oh, you've heard 10? See, there you just go to see with the karma.
You just have to hear it 1,000.
See, there you go. See, everybody's got their own with this. There's someone in here probably saying, I only need to hear it like 10 more times. Yes, exactly. That's the truth. That's the truth of it. Yes. So yeah, just relax into it. Relax into it because it's never the same. Nothing ever is. So of course, this is how we begin. And the first thing is to get into the fact of like what we mean by a self. That's to set this up appropriately. So if a self is a thing that could exist from its own side, if that's the way we're going to define it, anything that could have its own nature, that's the kind of self we're referring to. So the self that we deny or say doesn't exist then isn't the same thing. There's a difference there in terms of what it is that we deny or what that is, what the absence of that self is. So yes, and I'm really thinking we need to maybe get a dog just for this teaching. So if some adorable little puppy comes running in here and I, wiggle it down here in front of him and he jumps up here, what's he going to do with this thing?
Write a novel.
That would be an amazing dog. Yeah, we'll go with chew on it. We'll go on and chew on it. That's probably more practical. Yeah. So the dog would chew on it, and yet we look at it, and what would we do with it?
Write a novel.
Yeah, that would be nice, actually. That would be very nice. So who's right? The puppy or us?
Both.
Neither.
Why do you say neither?
Because if we take one position and say somebody's right, we're assuming that there is some true reality to that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm. So would you say then how is this not a chew toy for the puppy? Would that be the true reality for the puppy? That they're going to town on this thing.
for the puppy, but that's not what you asked.
Hmm.
You asked
Who's right?
who's right.
Yeah. So what's right for the puppy?
That's chew toy.
Yeah. And it'd be, for us, writing with it would also be right. So in that sense, yeah, both would be right. And you bring up a good point, which is the fact of that for both the puppy and for us, it's a matter of how we are validly and correctly perceiving it as to how it works for each of us. And that is a key distinction. So now, if that's the case, then you could say then that there are three things, right? So that there's, for the puppy, it's a chew toy. For us, it's a pen. And then there's how it really is. Right? Everybody agree with that?
I don't know, I get a little itchy about that. Because
What about it?
making it seem like how it really is somehow self-existent.
Mm-hmm.
Propose it in such a manner. It's like you
Yeah, that's a good itch. His itchiness is right. There isn't.
But we can say it really is.
What it
Without having to describe what it is or how.
That's interesting. We can say it really is without having to say or describe what it is. So in other words, not label it. So then how would we know what it is?
Just what it is to us. But
Right.
I'm pretty sure it exists regardless of whether it's a puppy or me.
Mm-hmm. But how would you know that?
How would I know that I know?
How would you know that it's existing?
Because I don't think there's anyone that wouldn't perceive it as existing. Just
Mhm.
how it exists is how the perception differs.
Sure. So if you're perceiving it as existing, so meaning that if it's existing, then is it a thing? So if something exists, then it is an object of some sort. But would you be able to know that object without labeling it?
No.
Okay.
But I could come to convince myself not to try to label it.
Which is great. That's great because that's ultimately where we're headed. Is to get to the point where we don't need that anymore. That being said, you would still be able to see how others would be perceiving it then. Because at that point then you would be understanding how things are really working. But for every other type of being, you would be able to see like, oh, the dog is perceiving this as a chew toy. The human is perceiving this as a pen. The enlightened being is perceiving this as some unbelievable object of bliss. So that's really great. You're heading in the right direction. Is that to get to the point is where it's like, I'm no longer attached to the need of that label. But for us right now, quite honestly, if we weren't labeling this, reifying it with this label of pen, then for us it wouldn't exist. So let's go deeper into that. So does that mean, should we get angry with the puppy when they're like going to town on our pen? Aside from the fact of like, no, we're all sweet and we don't like to get angry and all of that, but still, in the memory, it's like literally this was like a $400 pen that had been given to you by your mentor, and you have written some of like the best things you've ever written with this pen, and this dog is just like literally destroyed this. Wouldn't you be slightly thinking like, okay, that's not right. The puppy should not be chewing on that. Yes, it is. Yes, it definitely is. Ultimately, no. No. And why is that? Why should we not get angry with them?
Well, having that perception of the dog destroying our pen was planted, having that perception is a result of a seed we planted by doing that to someone else's, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Chew on other people's pens?
This is a moment of revealing here. No, you're absolutely right. So we wouldn't want to plant that seed again.
Right.
So we want to plant that seed again. And then just on a practical level, on a very practical level, is that we wouldn't get angry with them because they don't know that it's a pen for us. They don't perceive it as a pen.
And they don't
You know?
have a conception of value. Like we think it's a $400 pen, that doesn't mean anything to a dog.
Exactly. But then you can flip it in terms of value and say, okay, so the puppy's down here and I'm like holding it up here and I'm not even really purposefully kind of doing this. This is just a manner that I'm doing. And that dog is down there just literally just like, salivating and so forth. So if it was, would he, if they were to be like, growling at us, being like, let go of my toy and so forth, it would be the same thing on that side. Neither of us is at fault because the dog doesn't know what that is for us either. So, and that's an important thing to do when we, especially with our relationship with animals, because it's something where it's so easy to be like, stupid dog, it doesn't know what that meant to me. And just even that little moment of that. And, as we get deeper into this, you'll see how that kind of, as Veronica's bringing up, that karmic seed, the shift in that is so quick, and I'll just cut to the chase, that then there's one day that you see this as a chew toy. That's what that seed can lead to. And that's where we get into how the result is somehow similar to the cause. And it has to be the case in order for it to be a cause. It needs to be related to the result in some ways. It doesn't have to be direct. Doesn't mean necessarily that you would end up being a dog. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves in this sense. But scientifically, go ahead.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
As far as planting the seed,
Mm-hmm.
like when you see the anger come up in you,
Yeah.
is it planted then, or if you have a thought going against this, and this is something I've been thinking about, if you have a thought like, oh, that's a silly voice, I shouldn't be, I've learned through my studies and everything and meditation to just calm that. Like, is that seed already planted, so I'm going to see it again and test it again? Or eventually, are you just supposed to not even have that voice, or just change your relationship to that voice?
Well, that's an interesting way to put it. What's really beautiful, one of the most exquisite ways in which karma works is that the moment of that anger rising up, and it's really wonderful that if you see it rising. So in other words, you don't physically do anything towards the dog. You don't even say anything like stupid dog, that doesn't even come out, but you see that thought of anger rising. That seed's ripened. That imprint in your mind, that impression that's been planted there from previous acts, that's its ripening. The moment that you make that choice to say, oh, I'm not going to be angry about this, or I'm not going to strike this dog, or say something like that, that immediately, that right there is a meritorious act. That's a virtuous, that's a good deed right in that moment. And that's the seed that you're planting. You don't do that seed's gone. That seed, that's exploded, and that's it. But this is the whole thing about when you get into learning how to work with karma, is that if you get to that point where you're seeing these things rise in your mind, is that it's a wonderful thing, because the truth of the matter is that this is all built on not truthfully being able to change the moment in the moment. Things are just ripening like that. They say 65 per second, is ripening. It is continually coming into how you are responding to that. But see, the thing is that most of the time, we're just acting. We're just acting out. There's a lot of people are not thinking about seeds, exploding in their mind, and like what those seeds are and what those impressions are based upon and so forth. That's why this is one of the reasons why this is so priceless, is because that once you start going down that road and you start believing it and seeing it, happening in your life, that it then starts to completely shift your entire way of living and the way you see the world. Is realizing that, please, just even within the past year, you've done so many things that you probably wish you hadn't done or thought, and let alone however many years you've accumulated in this life. So this is the thing where you get freed from this concern of like, oh my God, I've done so much terrible shit, I don't even think about that. You don't have to worry about it. It's going to happen. You don't have to think about that. What happens is that when that thought rises, when that action happens, is that now you can do something with it, which is the fact of that in that moment, it's the fact of, because let's say you then do something, you say something you wish you hadn't said, and that right there is that the moment that of acknowledgement of that, I wish I hadn't said that, right there, that's a good seed. And then you can go into what we call the four forces or the four powers to actually then really purify that act in your mind very, very firmly, which we'll actually get into that a little bit later. But that's a great question. It's a great question. So most of the people that make these things, or I should say probably the scientists that would come in here and describe this thing would probably be like, well, at a base level, this is a hard cylinder, or a hard cylindrical shape. And from the Buddhist perspective, you would then say, using that perspective on it, you would say this is then raw data. That's essentially what it is. To get more technical about it, would be the basis for imputation, which is what we need as to being able to acknowledge whether it exists or not. We need this raw data. Otherwise, it doesn't exist for us. So yes, if the puppy sees this cylinder as something to chew on, and we see it as something to write with, then there isn't anything in between. It's not as though there's the real pen, or in this case, it's going to be the real cylinder, which is what got Ryan itchy, is just that fact. There's what it is for the being who is perceiving it. How are they perceiving that raw data? So that there isn't anything in between that. Otherwise, if this pen, if this cylinder, or excuse me, if this pen was coming from its own side, then the dog would see it as a chew toy and go to town on it. Then we would be, then we would have the karma of seeing this chew toy. That's the thing. If it was a chew toy from its own side, and it had this nature of its own to only be a chew toy, then I would really be licking my lips right now, and needing to restrain myself from putting this thing in my mouth. But I'm not. I'm perfectly content with the fact that this is a pen, and I use it to write with. But that's the root of then getting to how that this has no self-nature then. Well, let's go a little bit deeper into that. And don't get tripped up on the use of this word nature. It does have a nature of it being a pen insofar as we perceive it as a pen. So remember, once again, we were saying, well, what's a self? Self is an object that has a nature from its own side. So, we're not denying we're not denying the, let's put it this way, the projected or perceived nature of this as a pen. We are not denying that. That's not where the issue is. That would really be called the self-nature of the pen that exists. To your point, Greg, of what you were saying about something existing in that way, that would be the self-nature of the pen that exists. But once again, it doesn't have a self-nature coming from its own side. Okay? Therefore, what? It can only be coming from you or the adorable puppy.
Oh, wait, what's coming from me? My perception of it is coming from me.
Yes,
Okay.
of it as a pen. Very important point. Why are we seeing this as a pen?
Because currently that's where we're at.
Pardon?
Is it because currently that's where we're at? That we saw it as a tooth toy and now we see it as a pen and eventually we'll see it as empty?
That's a pretty good progression right there.
Sounds like evolution.
Yeah, I was about to say. Yeah, what I think you're getting at is the fact of our karma, which is the previous moment of seeing this as a pen. But it's one thing to say that we see. It's one thing to say that we see a hard cylinder, but it's another thing to say that we see a pen. And that's where the karma comes into play, because your past actions, the past moments of your mind of perceiving this as a pen is the only reason that you're seeing it right now as a pen. And that's where, you have to get used to the fact that you really don't have a choice about that. I mean, this is, you're being forced in every single moment that I keep talking about this to see it as a pen based upon the previous moment. And it's not as though saying, well, that's because you were talking about it 5 seconds ago, and that's impression in my mind is just happening now for me to see it as a pen again. It goes back even further than that. The most important part of that is the fact that it's based upon how you have perceived such an object as this in the past. I mean, that's all that really matters. Is it a projection? Yes. Is it an illusion that works? See? Is it a hard cylinder that my mind is forcing me to see as a pen? You could say yes to that as well. And we have been forced to see our mind, our karma, our past actions have forced us to see this as a pen most of our life. And this is part of why we get angry, possibly get angry, when the puppy is chewing this thing up, is because of the fact that the anger comes from the misunderstanding of what this thing really is. So there's the imbalance that we constantly have going on, is that, please, man, I mean, 99.9% of the time I'm using this thing as a pen, then some other being comes along and start using it as something that, and that's not what that's for, And that kind of limitation that we have is just, Is your pen not working? Somebody's got to give this girl a pen.
I'm not angry.
That is great. That is so wonderful. It's so wonderful because literally it wouldn't be so much Kelly turning into a puppy by the end of class, but it'd be us perceiving her as a puppy at the end of class. You know, because she wouldn't be that on her own, of course. Yes, so it's funny just to bringing up the dog. Because the puppy is not seeing this as something to chew on because the puppy is a dog. He's a dog because he's seeing it as something to chew on. So you get that distinction?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. The puppy is not seeing this as an object to chew on because it's a puppy. He's a puppy because he's seeing it as something to chew on.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, right. So right. So the self nature, the self nature of the pen that doesn't exist is a pen that could come from its own side, independent of our karma that's forcing us to see it that way. So I'll repeat that. The self nature of a pen that doesn't exist is a pen that could come from its own side, independent of your karma, to see it that way. So there would have to be, and this is what, like, so if you were to say, well, yes, it's definitely possible to see something independent from my karma, then in that case you'd have that third option. That there's, you know, there's what we perceive as humans, there's what the dog is perceiving, and then there's how there really is, how it really is. Like there's this amorphous realm of existence where all things exist. You know, but that's at least not the wisdom that, you know, that we've been passed on to in terms of karma, which is the fact of, no, if you're working within the realm of causality, then what is causing you to see this as a pen is the previous moment of mind that has seen it as a pen, you know, and go on back, you know, and the same for the dog. And truly, this is now why karma becomes so vital, you know, so vital, because it breaks down to then why you should act morally in the world. Because in any moment it can shift. The pen can stop working, and the next thing you know, you're going to town on this. And it is. That shift in perception is very fast. You know, I don't know how many times, you know, that I've asked, you know, our elders, you know, whether it had been in my own family or friends and so forth, and just say, you know, when you look back, you know, does it seem like it's just gone so fast? And it has always been yes. It has always been yes. You know, and that's a very just practical, real experience of this life. You know, talking to someone who's 80 years old, and they're like, oh yeah, you know, I can remember graduating from high school, you know, like that, and now I'm 80.
Brian, I have a question. Would you repeat that other sentence one more time? The
Oh.
self-nature of the pen that doesn't exist.
Sure. The self-nature of a pen that doesn't exist is a pen that could come from its own side, independent of your karma, making you see it as a pen. You know, and this is so important. If you understand, you know, if you really understand the art of collecting good karma, you know, acting selflessly for the benefit of others, then that's why then one day that you could see this as an object of bliss, because it's literally, it's you planting the seeds in your mind continually about how this is really working. You know, you'll hear it sometimes bandied about within these walls, or, you know, within, you know, well, it's empty, you know. And that's not meant to be used in a trite way whatsoever. It's an important impression that people are hopefully making upon their minds about, like, and this is how things are really working. You know, this is how things are really working. So that, you know, as Greg was pointing out, there gets to the point one day where the labels, you know, become something that you're only using for the welfare of others. It's the only reason you need to do it. Because how are you going to help someone? How are you going to teach someone unless you can communicate to them in a language in which they'll understand, such as nice pen. Where do you think that pen's coming from? You know, and thus it begins. First, do you understand the emptiness of yourself and objects that you perceive outside of yourself? And then you move on to collecting the good karma in your mind by how you perceive things to start changing your world. And this is what's so beautiful about what they've done here in this first part of the second point, which is that that's what they're starting with, is that they're starting with ultimate bodhicitta, which is the direct perception of emptiness. They're saying, do your preliminaries, and then boom, we start right here, which is how things are really working and how things are being perceived. Meditate on that first, and then move on to what we call universal love. Then move on to deceptive bodhicitta. And it's really extraordinary, because so often you would think like, you know, I'm working with things here, as you know, I'm working with the deceptive reality here. But when you're going into meditation here in this practice, it's a beautiful approach to start right with this, and which is that, okay, I'm seeing how, as the line goes, all things are a dream, an illusion, you know, simply a perception of my mind that can shift, that can change based upon how I'm behaving towards others and how I'm understanding how things are working in the world. All right. Let's take a break there. Let that, and then we'll go deeper. We'll go deeper into that. Any questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I'm getting the self part. You know, yesterday, a homeless person approached me, and you know, I automatically thought the thing to do is to give. You know, don't question and then dedicate, you know, the fruits of this out. You know, and it's just like I'm thinking, you know, give this to my teacher. This is done. You know, think about.
Right.
But I couldn't help noticing that in the back of my mind, there's that little me that's saying, "You did this one. You did this.
Wait, say what?
You did this. I did this."
Yeah, Juan did it.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm all like, okay. So when you're talking now about like jumping up to ultimate bodhicitta, I'm all like, how can I get there when there's this ego still there saying, yeah, you're gonna reach ultimate bodhicitta.
Right. Right.
So I guess I'm kind of getting stuck on how does that I don't even know how to how does this path help one move away from maintaining that self, so that one can totally be selfless and doing some act like this? Because I can't.
Yeah, yeah. That is so awesome. That little voice, you know, that we all have, which we can label the ego, that is the next thing we're going to be talking about.
Cool. I'm gonna write
Yes, literally after the break, we're going to go right into that. Because you're right, we've got to get to the emptiness of the self. We've got to get to that. So great, you set us up perfectly.
I try to be a bodhisattva, but there's still a me trying to do something. It's like, let go. What's important?
That's kind of in a way like, I remember Lama Marut said that it's important that you have a strong ego so that you can break it down. So that way you use that as a tool in order to break it down. So like, you being like, I
let's jump back in. Hey, Scott. Thank you, Scott. This is so great. It was great to be able to speak directly to Scott in this way, because I'll never forget Scott's face during when we did that meditation series in the spring. And I think it was when we had done the pen. And I just remember looking over at him at some point, and I think, Scott, you literally did some gesture like he just went like, and that is, I mean, one could almost say that was the direct perception of emptiness. It would look something like, and it was really beautiful. So thank you, Scott, for giving me a reason to go through this again, because God knows I need to learn this. All right, so yeah, let's start to crack in now more deeply into the second point, and the first line, which is to learn to see all things as a dream. So this is really what the pen and the emptiness of the pen is getting at, which is that we should see all things as exactly what this is, which is that it's potential, it's neutral. And it reminds us that what we see is a projection forced upon us by our past actions. But it's that connection at the same time. It's the connection of that you're looking at this and like, yes, this object here is completely full of potential, and I am seeing it the way I'm seeing it based upon how I have thought, acted, and spoken in the past. So, if some guy walks in here right now, and let's call him Joe. So some Joe walks in here, some joker walks in here. I feel like I'm setting up a really good joke. He's very bold, and he comes and literally just moves stuff out of the way, sits down right next to me. Essentially we have, and then on top of that, then starts talking. So I certainly would be kind enough to let this guy talk. We essentially would have kind of one of three reactions to him, which would be one is that we actually dig what this guy's saying and we like him, or we don't dig what he's saying and we don't like him, or we really don't care either way. That it's so, basically our feeling is that is neutrality. So then the question is the likability or dislikability possessed by this guy? Does he possess the likability or dislikability that we're experiencing? No. Why?
Because then we would all agree on how we're perceiving it.
Mm-hmm.
All of us would love him, all of us would hate him,
Right.
all of us would say, well, we don't really care.
Exactly.
But each one of us is probably going to have a different opinion.
Right.
Unless his jokes really suck.
Exactly. It still comes down to your karma. And it is. It's in this sense, whether this guy looks like he's, whether this guy seems cool to us or he seems lame, in either way, the truth is that that's what makes it like a dream. This is the part where that an illusion looks real, right? But it's not. So when you're looking at this, learn to see all things as a dream, you get to that why. Why are we seeing that way? So that the likability, the dislikability, whether he's, the coolness or the lameness of this guy does not belong to him. And that's something that, this is what we need to pound in our heads, because it looks quite often like the qualities of someone that we like or dislike is something that constitutes them. This is the kind of trickiness then you can see of the word personality. The ality of a person. Those qualities of a person in that way. But that's the illusion. That's the illusion, that it seems like that. And it's exactly what Veronica said, because she's sitting over there and she's like, this guy is hot. I totally dig what he is saying. He could talk all night long. She turns to Greg and she's like, what do you think? And Greg's like, this guy is a jerk, man. I wish he would shut up, and that right there is like, that's what proves it. That's what proves it. And and this is a good thing to check in with yourself during the course of the day, is when you're, whatever it is you're doing with someone, and you're having this feeling of like, because you feel certain about this, like, man, this guy is acting like a jerk, and it seems absolutely incontrovertible, to that case, and then that is the moment. Do whatever you can do to bring this fact of karma to mind, which is to be like, well, should I ask this person right next to me? And of course you don't even need to go that far, typically, to do that. But right there in that moment, you could be saying to yourself, it's like, well, it's not necessarily true. Who knows how they're seeing this person? Yeah. So, if I draw a sun, this is kind of fun. If I draw a sun, is this looking like a sun to any of you? That's perfect. See, this is working. It's working. It's working. Yes. Maybe I need to add some clouds then to give the illusion. Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's getting kind of psychedelic now. So, obviously, I drew the somewhat appearing sun and clouds on the chalkboard. It's not like it was there beforehand. So I needed this blank canvas. I needed this blank chalkboard, or whiteboard, in order to do that. And of course, what is happening literally in every moment as I'm starting to do this is all of my past actions of being able to see what would that be like to draw a sun, which is something that could not have happened unless I had this empty canvas. So that's what that person is, that's what everybody's providing for us. We look at them and they're just beaming in front of us like, I am potential, what are you going to do with me? So then, then you get into like, well, I want to see everyone, as an angel or beautiful and really good. But don't forget, how is it that you're seeing them? It's how you've behaved in the past. And that is the part that this is This is where the struggle comes in. You can't do anything about that. It's going to ripen that you see this beaming person of potential in front of you and you're like, oh my God, what an ass. But now, when that, as Kelly was saying earlier, when that thought starts to rise, then you can say, like, first of all, I don't want to think about this person that way. And right there, you've planted a great seed. So that's where you can start doing it. Just like when you're seeing the homeless person, there could be a number of times that like that person could react to you with violence, physical violence or something like that, and you wouldn't even be having any kind of expectation like that, especially if you were to give that what they just asked for. You got any money, and you hand them literally a $20 bill. And so, the expectation would be that you're starting to draw, that's the danger of drawing, feeling as though I do this and this is what happens. I give him $20, happiness or kindness and so forth. But that's the crucial element there is what we call the karmic gap. And that's our concept of time. And because we have the concept of time that we have, that there is, when you place the cause, you plant the seed, and when it will ripen, it can be days, weeks, months, years later. Yeah, if you believe that, yes, absolutely. It could be lifetimes. So that's the thing about that. That's why, and what's good about that, as this starts to get into what you were asking, Juan, is that starts to then detach you from the ego. Is because you see it's like, okay, I'm doing this suddenly means like that person who would be doing it, so if you're saying Juan's doing this good act, well then Juan would see the result, of that good act. And it's like, that might not be the case ever, in this life. It could be 20 years down the road, you could have Alzheimer's and have forgotten your name. There's countless ways of which that does. And so it's a beautiful way to then start to remove your possessiveness of that. But we'll get into that a little bit deeper as we move further down into this. Right. So, yeah.
There was also something that Lama Cliff had told us in the Bodhichitta classes,
Mm-hmm.
Bodhisattva classes, about how when you become conscious of karma and that you are constantly planting seeds,
Right.
and you start making decisions to help others, even though you know that you're planting good seeds for yourself later, he said there's really nothing wrong with that because it's contributing to a better world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So never feel like you're doing a selfish act just because you've decided, knowing that it's going to come back at some point, that you're going to help someone.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it's a beautiful way to approach that in everything that you're doing. And it does even more power when you think about the emptiness of that act, though, at the same time, which is the fact of this person, that you're doing it for, they have no nature from their own side. You don't either from your own side. And then also the act has no self-nature of itself either. And so that's what's so really great about it, is that so much of this is, so much of the seeds we're planting, particularly at this point in our path and so forth, you're getting, it's some, what I would say, kind of crop rotation, as a gardener. You're throwing in, you still got weeds that are rising, and you're planting fruit at the same time. So that's why, let's be honest with ourselves. There's the times where you can have that thought and think, this is really an enlightened self-interest here. This is going to lead to my, to the enlightenment this mind so that then I can truly be of help to people. And, and at the same time, you're the one that has to be mindful enough of that, but at the same time, don't forget how this is working, because and so we're toggling in between that all the time until the point where that toggle is no longer necessary. But we can only get there, of course, by planting those seeds in our mind, so that's a beautiful point. Thank you for bringing that up. Well, and clearly everybody, everybody in this room seems to have that understanding, right? That therefore, the likability, the dislikability, the only place it could be coming from is you, and you have the simple proof of that, of turning to the person next to you and asking them what they think, and they think something totally different. I mean, we can do this in the extreme of, obviously, art. I mean, is the very prime example in this way with, like, Hey Jude is an awesome song, unquestionably, self-existently. And I can remember the day that, years ago I said to someone and they were just like, yeah, no, that's all right. I mean, it wasn't even a hate or this was like, yeah, it's all right. It was like, what? And this is great because you can do this with a song, you can do this with a painting, you can do this with a movie, and that's why there is a multitude of variation you get to see on it, and this is one of the great uses of art in this way. I mean, this is so great when you can watch a movie with someone that shares any of this kind of thinking with you, and you can start to get into the emptiness of that movie and the karma as well. Like, well, it's like you'll find yourself saying, I had the karma to see this, and this, and make these, and these connections. And then they're sharing the same thing. You're like, wow, I didn't even see that. And it's wonderful because then you're starting to make those distinctions in your mind. Where's it coming from? And how is it happening? The way we often will say this is that the emptiness is delivering the presentation. It's this white board. And the karma is delivering the interpretation. So, as we started hearing, as you started saying earlier, like, I see an amoeba, I see the hair of the dog or whatever. And that's why they work in tandem the way that they do. You need both. You need both to understand it. Mm.
Okay, you said the empty board was delivering the presentation, the karma was delivering the interpretation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So this brings up a good point, which is that, earlier I was saying, so, your karma, your past acts forces you to see the person the way that you do. So can you choose to see someone a different way?
Yes.
Greg said, a lot of yeses. All right, so why are yes? Why do people think yes?
With course 1,
Mm-hmm.
Lama Marut said, see everyone as a Buddha. And I tried that this past week, and it caused me to thank people that piss me off. Because they're my teacher.
Right, yeah.
And essentially, they're only there to teach me a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And if I view them as any less than that, as a Buddha, then I am planting a horrible seed towards them, sending an energy towards them that, it'll eventually come back to me and,
Yeah, and it'll be worse.
yeah.
Yeah. So when you're doing that, when you've been doing that throughout the week, how's it been working? Have you still?
It's been amazing.
Yeah, and have you had moments Have you had moments where you've tried focusing that on someone who really irritates you?
Yeah, that
Awesome.
someone who was auditioning, I didn't have respect for him because of
Mm.
how he treated the auditionees
Mm.
in past auditions. So I walked in the room pretending like he was a god and praying to him like, oh, it's so good to see you,
Mm.
thank you. And he ended up being like so, and probably it's just my own perception.
Yeah.
It was just he was so kind in so many ways and smiling, and the energy was just like,
See, that's wonderful. I mean, and it's so important to realize that him reacting that way, you perceiving him reacting as positively as he did, was actually not based on how you were trying to perceive him in that moment. That was based on how you have behaved towards someone else in the past. That ripening of that seed would be based upon the past action of you having that kind of kind view of someone. Because that's where the pratfall can happen for us. Once again, is thinking like, oh, I walk in and I'm purposefully seeing this person like that and thinking like, oh, it's because I'm doing that's happening. And the whole thing is that it can't happen that way. It's impossible for it to happen that way. It's got to be coming from something that's based on how you've behaved in the past. Because in that moment, and this is why it becomes this is where it becomes very evident for you, is that when you try doing this with someone that really irritates you often, see how long it works. You know, see how long it works. And what seems to be proven the majority of the time is that eventually it starts to burn up at some point. Like it's going really well and so forth. And this is not meant to like show you kind of like a tainted view of how things can happen. It's just more about the truth of it, is that you're trying to see someone a different way. Whatever you go do whatever you do, a job or work, and you go and do this with this person, you come in and you're feeling good, and then eventually you get pissed, or it's the patience, I'm patient, yes, I see them doing this, I'm watching them do this with other people, patience, and then just like, finally, I've had enough, and that really is the truth for us. And that is a very gross level of showing how it's like, it doesn't happen. You don't change that view of someone in the moment like that, and that's what we need to use these really practical ways of practicing that. Now, of course, it all comes down to ultimately what we would call your view, your view as you're seeing your karma ripen. So with someone that is, that typically you have seen as being, a jerk, and you're starting to see them, think about what's better. Because if you're making the connection that, oh, it's because of the way I'm acting now is the way they're behaving now, look at the limitation of that versus that the reason I'm seeing this person as being decent right now is because of how I've behaved in the past. So what that does is that starts to set up a cycle of purification then. That starts to get you in a way of like anyone you encounter, it doesn't make it so much anymore than about like, okay, it's good with this person, but not good with that person. It's training your mind to continually be like, oh, okay, it's coming from there. I can't grasp this moment of this is how I see them right now, and this is the reason why it's happening like that. So it's a very important distinction in that way.
So I have another question. So based on this concept of self also, you asked about if we can choose to see people in a certain way. Who is choosing? Again, there's that self.
This is so great. Yes, it's the same question, really. Who is doing that?
Right.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
for me to say I
Mm.
And then I get into these, mental things about, well, there's that funny saying, my karma ran over my dharma.
Yeah, right.
And so it's just like, well, am I on this path because I chose to be, or is it because I was meant to be?
Yeah. You were, well, and that would be closer to the truth, is that you were forced to be. Yeah, you were forced, if you believe that.
So then when you ask, do we choose, then I would say, no.
Right. You don't choose. You don't choose. All you're experiencing moment to moment is how you've behaved in the past. But what happens is, as you experience every moment in your life, as you see the thoughts and the acts rising within your mind, that is where you have the moment of control. Because you can say like, oh, I'm seeing that I have the desire to yell at this person. I really want to give them a piece of my mind. And then that's right at the moment where then you can do something about that. But that's just how it just keeps moving forward in that way. This is why, that karmic gap there becomes so crucial to keep that in mind. And they do say this, and we're going to go right to this who that you're getting to. It's coming up just in like the next few verses, because that's a key point. Yeah.
So really, our choice only has to do with our future.
Yep.
And making the choice to change our future.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the next moment is 10 to the negative 44 second.
Right, you're just purely gardening for the future. And see, to me, this is a relief.
Yeah.
It's a relief. It's a relief to be like, you know what? It's like I've done what I've done, and I'm going to experience the results of what I have done. And that's no longer my focus as to my worry and anxiety about how I'm living my life. It's what I do as that stuff ripens, That's where, and it's like, and then when you see you've got the tools to do something about that, then it can make all the difference. Yeah. So yes, so we're going to get to that in just a moment. Yeah. Yeah, so if any of this is true, yeah, right? Then what would be the result of acting with kindness towards everything and everyone?
Great help.
Yes, definitely. Even bigger. Go even. Yeah.
Enlightenment.
What'd you say?
A big sunset.
Yes.
And enlightenment.
Yeah. And and like on a practical level, what that really can mean is that everything you experience, you will love. That's all that could end up being the result of.
Yeah.
Everything.
Quit judging it and
Yeah.
just enjoy the experience.
Because everything you're doing is you're acting with the mindset of kindness towards. So then it's like that all that seeds will propel you to is that all you ever are seeing then is everything that you see with kindness, that you love. And then that's how the heaven, the nirvana is created here. And that's what I love so much about that, is because you can see how it's like, all right, if I stay on this, if I keep with this, especially when it's tough, because it's very true. I mean, this course is not entirely about, teaching all the laws of karma, but the second law is karma grows, and that's so, right? It's working on both sides, or both ways. So you're doing this goodness, you're doing this kindness, so all that's going to end up is growing, it's going to be bigger and bigger and bigger, just the same with anything that's heinous, This is why in saying the seed, for instance, of lying, what that's going to grow into is going to be bigger than someone just lying to you, like one person just lying to you or something like that. The lie that could come back to you who knows, it's going to be exponential. And this is quite honestly why it's so great to take vows, because then it's like now you've got this other reason to be like, you know what, if the vow meant anything to me, I vowed that I would try not to act in this way, and then that gives the vow a power, in your own mind. And it literally can, it's amazing how much it can compel you to then change your behavior in the moment. And then of course, if you do that mindfully, if you actually think to yourself, and man, I just kept that vow, I just thought of that vow, then of course, what's that going to grow into? It's going to grow into the point that you are living that vow, and they say that the vows are literally, that's the physical body of the Buddha, of an enlightened being. The vows constitute that what's called the Sambhogakaya. So it's just the fact of like, I love that connection, that like your morality becomes your body because it can't harm anything. I mean, all it is goodness. I digress. So let's move on to the second line. Examine the nature of the mind unborn, or like, which is unborn, would be another way of saying it. So, we've done this where if you meet someone you don't like, you can handle the reason that you don't like them is coming from your own mind and not them, which is easier to accept because it's outside of you. You're seeing this, you're seeing this outside of your mind. But what about with yourself? And this goes, now it starts to turn in. So if you're upset with yourself that, you're depressed or you're angry, it's actually the same principle. And this is where we get to your point, Juan, is that you hear this voice in your head telling you how pissed off you are, but who is that voice? Who is that? Is that you? Is that you? Ooh, even conventionally.
No,
Why no?
because everyone has it.
That's interesting. Meaning everyone has this internal voice?
It couldn't perceive itself if that were you. There's something else that has to perceive that thought. Or
Right.
that emotion.
Right.
And what's perceiving it is who you are. Really.
That gets a little dicey at the end about who you are really, because if you're hearing a voice, can you be talking at the same time? So who's saying that voice?
Well, I would be more concerned with who is hearing that voice.
Sure, that's the other side of it.
Right.
But you see, the rabbit hole that you're in there is that can you hear it and say it at the same time? No. Don't even worry about trying to break that down. It's impossible. I mean, just in a practical way. I cannot be speaking to you right now and hearing at the same time. It might seem like that in a way, when you're really being unkind to someone. It's like, you're trying to have a conversation with someone and they're talking at the same time. And I see this in my own family from the Italian side, where it's like seeing these two women, like, it's like, are they hearing one another right now? This is amazing because they're both in a full conversation, and it's like, no, of course. It's impossible to be literally speaking and hearing what it is, particularly when you take it here, of this voice you're hearing in your head, and that's when you hear those thoughts. Where are they coming from? So the first place you go is, okay, well, it's coming from my past actions. It's coming from my karma in that sense. And then of course you need to get more specific about it. So your thoughts, such as that, you know, you're complaining or you're upset, are the same thing. They are the same potential as the person is. So the nature of your thoughts, this voice you're hearing in your head of the irritating person that you're seeing in the room is neutral. And that's what the unborn means there, is that it's neutral. And that's completely depends on what your behavior, what the movement of your mind has been in the past. You know, which is so in that given moment is it entirely depends on what it is. You know, so let's say it's you're complaining. You're like, God, you know, it's late, man. When is he going to end? I think it's long enough. Is of course you can see then that came from a previous moment of complaining about something else. You know. And see, that's the thing that we don't want to get hung up on, is then thinking that thought in and of itself is self-existent as well. It is being informed. You know, this is where we talk about the interpretation. The interpretation that your mind is receiving of it is coming from where that mind has been before, in relation. And this is where it's very helpful to see, like, the seed, where that seed was planted, what that seed was. I complained in the past about some other thing, you know, and now it's ripening right now, me sitting in class and being like, I wish this was over, you know. So this is where you can start to let up then on that voice in your head. Because what we're doing with that voice, like when you're giving them money, like, I'm doing this. Who is I in that sense? That I that you're speaking about is only pure potential. That I that's like, I'm the one that's going to do this generous, virtuous thing is then, what are you going to do with that I? So then because you could say, okay, well, I'm going to dedicate that I that I think is that is being mindful of this moment, I dedicate that I becomes totally enlightened. And so therefore, and then when you understand what that means, which is the fact of, and that I is something that perceives the ultimate nature of reality, then you don't have to worry. Then you don't have to worry, because that when you get to that point, that I will be gone. You know, that I will be gone. But that's that thing of where, you know what, all of us with that little voice. You know, and the morality of this kind of living is not driven, it's not driven by helping the situation in the moment. It is all about the future. You know, that's the kind of morality we're dealing with in this path. You know, versus there's kind of, you know, I know when I was growing up in the Catholic Church, there was, you know, this kind of aspect of, you know, you're doing this good thing for this person, and, you know, that's it right there. That's the connection of your morality. And then hopefully you'll get to heaven. So now that has a future aspect to it. But, you know, there was this concept of that. And in between there is something called death. You know, and that's, you know, in this particular path, is death self-existent? You know, and so that's part of what the death meditation gets to as well, is just that, no, that's not self-existent either. Because if it is, then all bets are off with everything. If there was one thing in this universe that was self-existent and that was death, then it doesn't work. It doesn't work, and it starts to fall down. So, all right, yeah, let me see where we are here. Okay, let's move to the next line. The antidote itself is gone to is. I love it. It sounds like The Wiz or something like that, like we're dealing in some wonderland. So if we're working with the understanding that everything that happens to us is caused by us, we're the cause, well, that's where it's coming from, then what about the understanding itself? So in other words, the concept. So the understanding is just the same as the irritating person. It's just the same as our thoughts. It is pure potential. And the best kind of thought, though, is to try to understand this principle, this concept of emptiness and karma. I mean, that's of course what, when you're dealing with this as an antidote, then the antidote is this idea, and it's neutral, whether you like it, you don't like it, you do get it, is once again dependent on how you've behaved in the past. So this is kids, they're just drumming this in right now, with each and every verse line as we go through it, is that it's still coming back to how you are behaving, and also how you've behaved in the past. So the first line, so learn to see all things as a dream. This is dealing with that, how things are happening around you in the world is based on your past acts. Then the second line, the examine the nature of the mind unborn, is how the things are happening in your own mind are determined by your past behavior. And then the third, about the anecdote, is even whether or not you get the concept is based on how you've behaved in the past. So therefore, and I love this, wisdom itself is based on your past behavior. So the fact that you're even sitting in here and that you get any of this is totally based on your past behavior.
Well then, wow, what a really beautiful, hopeful statement, because then if I'm here trying to understand this, which will mean I will ultimately understand it, then that means everybody is going to understand it.
Yes. Yes. That's great. You get the whole picture. Yeah, right?
That's a beautiful whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's it. Because that's, the world is your world. The world is your world. So therefore, if you get to that point of that understanding, then everybody is. So beautiful. So the next one is let it go in the essence, source of all things. This really just, the let it go means to actually just stay in meditation. So you're kind of doing this meditation where you're thinking about how things are going and where they're coming from. But that's the important part here, is that where you try not to think of things as coming from their own side, but you think how things are good or bad based upon how you've behaved before. So maybe what we'll do here is we'll do a little meditation to close out, which actually covers this next line, which is in between sessions, be a figment of the imagination. Yeah. Let's do that. All right. So just relax your face, kind of actually stretch it out a little bit, kind of move your mouth around and then close your mouth and just relax, roll your shoulders back. And just let yourself be comfortable. There might be a lot of ideas swimming around. That's fine. Just look at your breath. bring to mind someone that you honestly don't like. Doesn't have to be all the time. Sometimes you do get along with them, but you seem to consistently have a bit of trouble with this person. So imagine yourself seeing this person tomorrow, where you would typically see them. So if it's your workplace, or you see them at the yoga studio, wherever that might be. And remember that the reason that you're going to see this person who you see as unpleasant is because you were unpleasant to someone in the past. This is your reason for going to see them right now. And you choose right now not to respond negatively to them. Because you don't want to see them or anyone else as unpleasant. Be a figment of the imagination means that when you meet this person the next time in reality, you will use this preparation. You will be ready. And don't expect the person to respond in kind. This particular practice is about planting better seeds in the midst of a storm. The storm of your dislike for this person, who is not self-existently unpleasant, nor is your dislike for them self-existent. Nor are you. And that's liberation. You can let go of that image. Go back to your breath. And slowly open your eyes. So they refer to that in the line here as in between sessions. And that's specifically referring to in between meditation sessions to then do this little meditation, which, but it's, that's what I love about this. So it's in between meditation sessions, you can do this meditation. And I never knew what that meant until I talked to one of my lamas and one of my teachers, and we were we have these practices when we do 3-4 week solo retreats where you're doing like 4 meditation sessions a day and so forth, and they can be quite lengthy. And we have practices to do, which are literally called in-between sessions. And I remember asking her one day, I was like, yeah, so for that one I was doing this, and she's like, that's wonderful, yeah, in between the sessions, I was doing this Mahamudra meditation. It was just her showing me another moment of her enlightenment, her enlightened mind, because I was like, that's so great, right? Because it's as if I ever really want the meditation to stop anyhow, And when you get into retreats, you get into doing your own retreats, you'll find that you are cultivating that state of mind. And this is just a beautiful, sweet little piece they put in here that, of course, you don't even really need to close your eyes, even. It can be in the morning, and it's like, okay, I think I'm going to see that guy today, And it's wonderful because you do this, you can just be sitting there visualizing it like, yeah, I'm going to see him. I think we have a meeting at 2:00, and I'm going to be ready. And it's so vital that when you're visualizing this, that you see them as unpleasant, or like the guy you saw at the audition and so forth. You see them that way, and you see yourself going there, because what you're really doing there is you're going there to get to the emptiness of what that whole interaction is like. And that way, so when you do whatever you do, you show up, you're visualizing yourself sitting there with them and so forth, and they're looking at you with that look they have, and it's like, you're like, yeah, this is coming from me. This is what I've done. This is what I've done, And if you see them, and if you still see them there, and they're totally nonplussed still, but the whole thing about that is then you go and do that in reality, reality, as we start to break that down. So that's pretty good. That takes us that actually brings us right up to Tonglen, which, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but that's one of the awesome practices that's within the Lojong 7-point, and it's very good that we will devote a majority of the class next week to that, because this is where we get into the giving and taking and being able to totally purify your entire world. So the emptiness, you can see now where it really is. It's like you start to get that understanding of it, and it's like, wow, okay, that is how I can really start to act with true kindness towards others, and I can really have an open heart towards someone because I have some understanding of how this is working. Because when we talked about this at the beginning, about we know what it's like to be, attracted to someone and in love with someone, or without, this date apple bliss bread that Lily brought and so forth is so good and so forth. But it's when it's getting into the problem areas, that this is where, okay, why is this different? Why is this harder for me? Because that's the thing, we're blissing out and so forth. We're not even thinking about it so much then as we should. That, wow, I'm really loving this bread so much because I have given such a tasty morsel to someone else. That's the only way that I could have had the projection of her bringing this bread over to me, was that I gave something really delicious to someone else. So you've got it working that way. And same thing with this guy that you really don't care for. So use it over the next week, and enjoy it. I have to say that we have awesome teachers coming on Sunday for this yoga workshop. Mirashani and Jarrett Levine, who just power. They're awesome, and they're so I highly recommend doing that, because of course what that's going to do for you is greatly help your meditation practice. That's the point of yoga, and the main point of yoga. And they are wonderful teachers, and they're going to be doing music and candlelight yoga. I mean, it's like night of romance. So we're really blessed for them to come here. So please, if you can, do go to that. And you know, in thinking about, you know, I was thinking about this earlier today because I had this moment where I had looked at, you know, my dresser before I went out to, and I saw $2 on it, and I was like, yeah, oh no, I don't need that. And I, you know, I'd taken my card, and then sure enough, you know, I'm at the stoplight, and a homeless guy comes up to the window, you know, and I put down a minute. It's like right in that moment, it's like, man, you know, why did that happen? For me, in that moment, that was him coming to me to remind me. You know, like I was focused on what I would need those $2 for, versus take the $2. Yeah, it might be useful for someone. So it was making me think about, like, when we give the donations that we give here, is to donate with that mind of, like, oh, I'm giving this for someone else, you know, that. Especially if you have someone in mind who you're like, I know this particular person is strapped right now. You know, even if yourself that's the case, you're strapped. But then you know a buddy of yours who's also strapped. So it's like when you go and you donate for these classes, that it's like you're thinking about that person as like, I'm putting this in the bowl for them. Because now you know how that's going to come back to you. You know, it's going to come back very, 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 very good. And then you'll give it away again, even more. And in perfect world. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, you guys are pretty special to be here. It's pretty special. Yes. Absolutely, but people are free to go because I can see what time it is. But yeah, certainly.
This trio thing going on, I've listened to some of Geshe Michael's speakings,
Mm-hmm.
and